wooden gavel came down with a crack, sharp, decisive, final. The low murmur of the courtroom faded in an instant. Judge Robert Willis adjusted his glasses, barely glancing at the man before him. To him, this was just another case, another routine zoning dispute in a sleepy Wyoming town. Nothing special, nothing that would take up too much of his time. What he didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that this wasn't just any case. And the man standing at the defendant's table wasn't just any man. Clint Eastwood sat still, his expression carved from stone, weathered but unyielding, his pale blue eyes cold, unreadable. Carried a weight the judge was too blind to notice. He wasn't here to plead. He wasn't here to argue. And he sure as hell wasn't here to lose. The judge smirked, flipping through the case file, without a care in the world. "Mr. Eastwood," he said, his voice thick with amusement. "It says here your guest house exceeds the legal size limit under Jackson County zoning laws. That means you'll need to either bring it into compliance or remove it entirely." He finally glanced up, his smirk widening. "I assume you'd like to make a case for keeping it?" A few chuckles rippled through the room. The spectators, a mix of local officials and curious onlookers, enjoyed the moment. After all, this was Clint Eastwood, the Hollywood legend, reduced to arguing property laws like any other citizen. But Eastwood didn't blink. He didn't fidget. Instead, he leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. And when he spoke, his voice, though grizzled with age, carried effortlessly across the room. "I built that place with my own hands. It's not bothering anybody. And I sure as hell don't take kindly to the government telling me what I can and can't do on my own land." The laughter grew. Judge Willis shook his head. "Mr. Eastwood, the law applies to everyone, even if you have a few movies under your belt." More chuckles, more amusement. And then it happened. Slowly, deliberately, Eastwood reached into his jacket. The bailiff took a half step forward, his hand hovering near his holster. The room tensed, but Eastwood wasn't pulling out a weapon. Instead, he placed something on the table, a small silver badge. The overhead lights caught the lettering. The courtroom fell silent. Judge Willis squinted. His smirk twitched, faltered. What the hell is that supposed to be?" Eastwood leaned back, crossing his arms. "That, Your Honor," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "is a United States Secret Service badge, and it means I've had to enforce a lot more than zoning laws in my time." The air changed. The judge's face paled. The laughter was gone. The courtroom, moments ago filled with easy amusement, was now suffocating under the weight of something much, much bigger. And for the first time in his career, Judge Robert Willis felt his authority slipping through his fingers. Judge Willis blinked, adjusting his glasses as if hoping he had misread the words etched into that small silver badge. The weight of the moment settled on his chest like a lead brick. Secret Service? No, that couldn't be right. The murmurs in the gallery had died completely, replaced by an eerie, suffocating silence. Every eye in the room was locked onto that badge, glinting under the fluorescent lights. It wasn't a prop. It wasn't a relic from some long-forgotten movie set. It was real. Willis cleared his throat, forcing his voice into something resembling authority. "Mr. Eastwood," he said carefully, Are you telling me you were more than just an actor?" Eastwood didn't break eye contact. He let the question hang in the air like an unspoken challenge. Then he finally spoke. "I'm saying, Your Honor, that I've done a lot more than what's in your case file." His voice was steady, matter of fact, like he was discussing the weather. The judge swallowed hard. There had always been whispers, rumors that certain Hollywood figures had pasts buried deeper than their film careers. But this was something else entirely. The bailiff shifted uneasily, glancing between the judge and Eastwood, as if suddenly aware that the man standing before them wasn't just a defendant. He was something more, something dangerous. Willis licked his lips, his throat dry. He wasn't a fool. He knew exactly what he was looking at. a government-issued badge, one that wasn't handed out to just anyone. He sat back in his chair, suddenly aware of the beads of sweat forming at his temple. "Mr. Eastwood," he said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "What exactly are you doing here in Wyoming?" For the first time, Eastwood smirked, but there was no warmth in it. "Just trying to live a quiet life, Your Honor." But the judge didn't believe that for a second, and suddenly, a simple zoning dispute didn't seem so simple anymore. The judge sat stiffly in his chair, his fingers gripping the armrests a little too tightly. The weight of the courtroom had shifted, as if gravity itself had changed with the revelation of Clint Eastwood's past. The badge still sat on the table, gleaming beneath the overhead lights. Judge Willis cleared his throat again, his voice quieter now. I wasn't aware of your affiliations." Eastwood smirked, slow, deliberate. Not many were. Willis reached for the badge, his hands betraying a slight tremor as he turned it over, feeling the cool metal press against his fingertips. The insignia, the serial number. It was authentic, but something was wrong. This wasn't the standard issue of a field agent or security detail. This badge carried a different kind of weight, the kind tied to men who had operated in the darkest corners of national security. For the first time in his career, Judge Willis felt out of his depth. He exhaled slowly, placing the badge back on the table. "I'll admit," he said, forcing a thin smile, "I've heard rumors over the years about certain individuals, people with pasts that weren't meant to be discussed. But you," he shook his head, eyes narrowing, "I just figured you were an actor who happened to play tough guys on screen." Eastwood let out a low chuckle, but there was no humor in it. "You think it's easy playing tough guys?" he murmured. The judge hesitated. You think I just read a script?" "Pretended." Willis said nothing. Eastwood sat back in his chair, tapping his fingers against the wood. His voice dropped to something lower, something darker. "The truth is, Judge, I was good at two things. Acting," he smirked, "and getting my hands dirty." He let the words linger before adding, "One of those things paid better. The other one was a duty." A heavy silence settled over the room. The judge shifted, his legal mind racing. He had spent years presiding over contracts, disputes, civil cases. But this was something else entirely. Finally, he found his voice. "So what does that mean for this case? Because, Mr. Eastwood, as much as I respect whatever you've done in the past, it doesn't change the fact that zoning laws exist for a reason." Eastwood nodded slowly, as if he had expected that answer. "And I'm not asking for a favor," he said. "I'm asking for understanding." Willis arched a brow. "Understanding." Eastwood's voice dropped. The gravel in his tone deepened. "That guest house isn't just a guest house." The judge frowned. "Then what the hell is it?" Eastwood's pale blue eyes locked onto his. "It's a safe house." Judge Willis felt a chill crawl up his spine. A safe house. The meaning of those two words sat heavy in the air. Safe house for what? Eastwood smirked, his expression unreadable. "You ever hear of Blackthorn?" The judge's frown deepened. "Should I have?" "No," Eastwood leaned in slightly. "That's the whole point." Judge Willis drummed his fingers against the bench, trying to make sense of what he had just heard. Blackthorn. The name sat heavy in his mind, an unfamiliar ghost whispering from the shadows. He had ruled on hundreds, no thousands, of cases in his career. Never had he stumbled into something like this. His voice was tight when he spoke. "Let's say I believe you. Let's say your guest house serves some kind of national security purpose. Why not go through official channels? Why fight this in open court?" Eastwood's face darkened. "Because the people who should be protecting me are the ones trying to erase me." The words sent a ripple of unease through the judge's chest. He swallowed, suddenly very aware of how small this courtroom felt. Willis hesitated. "Erase you?" Eastwood nodded once. "Old programs have a way of coming back to haunt the people who ran them." He leaned back, exhaling slowly. Blackthorn was never supposed to exist, but when you work in the shadows long enough, you learn that nothing ever really stays buried. Before the judge could respond, a knock at the side door made him flinch. The bailiff stepped forward, leaning down to whisper in his ear. "Sir, there's a federal agent here. Says it's urgent." Willis stiffened. A federal agent? His eyes flicked to Eastwood, who sat completely still. He didn't look surprised, didn't even look concerned. Willis exhaled and turned to the bailiff. "Fine, let him in." Moments later, the door swung open. A tall man in a dark suit stepped inside, early 40s, sharp eyes, the kind of posture that suggested he was used to being the one in control. He reached into his jacket slowly, flashed a badge. Special Agent Mark Helton, Department of Homeland Security. The judge eyed him warily. "I assume this isn't a coincidence." Helton shook his head. "I'm afraid not." Then his gaze landed on Eastwood. His expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of recognition. "Mr. Eastwood." He nodded once. "Been a long time." Eastwood returned the nod, but his tone was flat. "Not long enough." The air in the room had shifted again. Helton exhaled, then turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, I'm going to need you to clear the room." Judge Willis frowned. "Excuse me." Helton didn't waver. This isn't a zoning dispute anymore. The judge hesitated, looking around the courtroom. The remaining clerks and spectators were already watching uneasily, sensing that whatever was happening had nothing to do with property laws. Finally, he grabbed the gavel. One sharp crack. Clear the courtroom. Minutes later, the doors shut. It was just Willis, Eastwood, and Agent Helton. Helton turned back to the judge. "You need to understand something." He gestured toward Eastwood. "This man isn't just an actor. He isn't just a former operative. He was part of something that never should have existed." Judge Willis felt his stomach twist. "Then why is he in my courtroom?" Helton hesitated. Then he reached into his jacket again, this time, pulling out a folder. He handed it to the judge. Willis flipped it open. His blood ran cold. Inside were grainy surveillance photos. Some old, taken in the shadows of history. Black and white images of Eastwood, standing beside high-ranking military officials, intelligence officers, even a former president. But the last few pages? The last few pages weren't history. They were recent. Satellite images, intelligence reports. One photo showed a burned-out compound in Eastern Europe. Another, bodies in the snow, lined up like discarded chess pieces. And then a name, Logan Pierce. Judge Willis looked up. His throat felt dry. Who the hell is Logan Pierce? Helton exhaled. The man who's cleaning up Blackthorn. He locked eyes with the judge. And if he knows Eastwood is still alive, it means your courtroom just became the front line of a war you never knew existed. Judge Willis stared down at the folder in his hands, feeling the weight of the images seeping into his bones. Surveillance photos, dead men, a history erased in silence. This wasn't a zoning dispute. This wasn't even about Eastwood anymore. This was about a war. He slowly lifted his eyes to Helton. "What exactly am I looking at here?" Helton crossed his arms. Proof that Blackthorn wasn't just a rumor. It was real. It was dangerous. And someone, he motioned toward the name on the last page, wants to bring it back. Eastwood finally spoke. "Pierce is the one pulling the strings, isn't he?" Helton hesitated, then nodded. Willis let out a slow breath. "You keep saying he's cleaning up Blackthorn. What does that mean?" Helton's jaw tightened. "It means he's eliminating everyone who was ever a part of it." The judge's pulse quickened. He turned back to Eastwood. "And you're on that list." Eastwood smirked. "I'm at the top." Willis rubbed a hand down his face. "Jesus Christ." Helton stepped forward. "Judge, listen to me. If Pierce is watching, then this isn't just about Clint anymore. It's about you. You're loose end now. Willis felt a cold dread creep up his spine. This is insane, he muttered. I'm a judge, for God's sake. I handle property disputes, not classified government assassins. Eastwood leaned forward. Not anymore. Before Willis could respond, a loud metallic clank echoed from outside the courtroom. A sound he didn't recognize, but Eastwood did. He was already moving before the judge even had time to process it. In one fluid motion, he grabbed Willis by the collar and yanked him down, just as, boom, the front windows shattered. The force of the explosion rocked the building, sending debris flying. The gavel hit the floor. Papers scattered like dying birds. Willis barely had time to duck before a bullet whizzed past his ear, shattering the judge's nameplate on the desk behind him. His breath caught. His hand shook. This wasn't a warning shot. This was an execution. Down, Eastwood barked, drawing a gun from inside his jacket. Helton was already moving, pulling his own weapon as he peeked around the doorframe. They're here. Willis pressed himself against the desk, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. Who? Who the hell is shooting at us? Helton reloaded. Pierce's men. More shots. Glass rained down. The distant roar of car engines closing in fast. Eastwood turned to Willis. Time to move, Judge. Willis let out a dry, near-hysterical laugh. Move. Move where? Eastwood smirked. Anywhere but here. He grabbed the judge and pulled him toward the back exit, just as another round of bullets tore through the wooden bench. Helton was the last one out, covering their retreat. As they barreled through the side door and into the dimming Wyoming afternoon, the sound of screeching tires hit Willis like a bad omen. 3 black SUVs. No markings. No hesitation. Just cold, professional precision. Eastwood yanked Willis toward a beat-up old truck parked in the alley. Get in. Willis turned to him. You. Get in the damn truck, Judge. The next second, the first SUV's doors flew open. Men in tactical gear emerged, weapons raised. Eastwood didn't wait. He fired. 3 shots. Controlled. Calculated. One of the men went down. Another stumbled back, ducking behind a vehicle. The third raised his rifle. Helton took him out. Willis barely had time to scramble into the truck before Eastwood slammed his foot on the gas. Tires screeched against pavement. Bullets pinged off the rear bumper. The city streets blurred past as the truck tore through alleys and side roads, Eastwood gripping the wheel with the kind of calm, practiced precision that suggested this wasn't his first high-speed escape. Willis clutched the seatbelt. Jesus, Clint, do you even know where you're going? Eastwood's jaw tightened. Yeah, away. Helton checked his side mirror. They're following. Willis turned to look. The black SUVs were gaining. Fast. Eastwood's fingers flexed on the wheel. We need to disappear. Helton nodded. I know a place. Eastwood took a hard right, sending Willis slamming against the door. Where? Helton's voice was tight. We need to find Tanner. Willis frowned. Who the hell is Tanner? Eastwood didn't answer, because at that moment, a gunshot rang out. The rear windshield exploded. The judge ducked instinctively as glass rained down. Helton spun around, returning fire. Willis's hands were shaking now. This was not his world. He was a judge. He handled cases, not gunfights. Eastwood glanced at him. Breathe, Judge. Willis sucked in air, trying and failing to steady himself. Breathe? I'm in a stolen truck, being chased by government assassins, with Clint freaking Eastwood behind the wheel. And you want me to breathe? Eastwood smirked. Glad to see you're catching up. Then he floored it. The truck roared forward, tires screeching as they disappeared down the empty highway, and straight into the next chapter of the war. The stolen truck sped down the Wyoming backroads, kicking up dust as the black SUVs faded into the distance. But Willis knew better than to feel relief. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Eastwood drove in calm, calculating silence. his pale blue eyes flicking between the road ahead and the rearview mirror. Helton was already on his phone, speaking in a hushed, urgent tone. Willis, on the other hand, was still gripping the seatbelt like a lifeline. Finally, he exhaled. "Someone tell me who the hell this Tanner guy is." Helton glanced at Eastwood, then back at the judge. "He's an old contact, one of the best surveillance and infiltration specialists Blackthorne ever had." Willis scoffed. "Great, so we're going to see another ghost." Eastwood smirked. "He's not a ghost. If Tanner was dead, we'd know." The judge frowned. "And if he doesn't want to be found?" Eastwood's smirk faded. Then we're already too late. The sun had started to dip below the trees by the time they pulled up to a small, nondescript cabin, half hidden among the pines. Willis could already tell something was off. There were no cars, no signs of life, just quiet, too quiet. Eastwood killed the engine, resting his hands on the wheel. He didn't move, didn't blink. Willis shifted. "What's wrong?" Eastwood's voice was low. If Tanner were expecting us, he'd be watching from that second-story window. Willis swallowed. "And he's not." Eastwood reached for his gun. "Stay here." Helton was already unbuckling his seatbelt. Like hell he's going in alone. Willis sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Right, and if this is a setup?" Eastwood cracked his neck. "Then we handle it." The judge muttered under his breath. "I was really hoping for a different answer." The door creaked as Eastwood pushed it open. Darkness. No sounds. No movement. Willis stayed at the threshold while Eastwood and Helton moved in like men who had done this before. Guns raised. Eyes scanning. The cabin was almost too perfect. Furniture in place. A half-empty coffee mug sitting on the counter, like someone had just stepped out. Helton nudged a chair. Still warm. Willis frowned. "Then where the hell is he?" Eastwood spotted something near the fireplace. A single bullet casing, placed neatly on the mantel, like a message. Helton's face darkened. "Damn it." Willis stepped forward, lowering his voice. "What does that mean?" Eastwood picked up the casing, rolling it between his fingers. "It means Tanner knew they were coming." The judge stiffened, and Eastwood placed the casing back down, and he ran. The silence inside the cabin stretched thin. Judge Willis could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the weight of something unseen pressing against the air. This wasn't right. Tanner was supposed to be here. Instead, they had a half-empty coffee mug, a bullet casing left like a signature, and the ghost of a man who knew when to disappear. Eastwood's expression remained unreadable, but his eyes told a different story. He knew exactly what had happened. Helton turned toward him. "Think he left voluntarily?" Eastwood exhaled through his nose. "Not voluntarily, but willingly." Willis frowned. "What the hell's the difference?" Helton gestured toward the untouched furniture. If they had taken him, this place would have been trashed. The judge swallowed hard. "So he ran." Eastwood nodded, before they could grab him. He turned back toward the coffee mug, running a finger along the rim, as if reading the last thoughts of the man who had been sitting there. Then, without warning, he grabbed a knife from the counter and stabbed it into the wooden table. Willis jumped. "Jesus, Clint." Eastwood wasn't looking at him. He was staring at the blade, buried deep into the wood. Helton caught on first. His voice dropped. "It's hollow." Eastwood yanked the knife free. The tip of the blade pulled up a hidden flap, revealing a compartment beneath the wood. Willis took a cautious step forward. "What is that?" Eastwood didn't answer. Instead, he reached inside and pulled out a small leather notebook. It was worn, battered, stained with time. The initials on the cover were faded but unmistakable. JT. Joseph Tanner. Eastwood flipped it open, his eyes scanning the scribbled notes inside. Short phrases, coordinates, names. Then he froze. Helton noticed immediately. "What is it?" Eastwood turned the notebook so they could see. His finger rested on the last entry, written in rushed, slanted handwriting. Only 4 words. Langley is still alive. Helton's breath caught. No way. Willis glanced between them. Who's Langley? Helton exhaled, shaking his head. Victor Langley was our handler. He ran Blackthorn before it got shut down. He looked at Eastwood. I thought he was dead. Eastwood's voice was quiet, dangerous. So did I. Willis blinked. Okay, let's assume he's alive. What does that mean for us? Helton ran a hand over his face. It means this isn't just about Pierce erasing the past. He locked eyes with Eastwood. It means someone's trying to bring Blackthorn back. The room was deathly silent. For the first time, Willis felt like he was beginning to see the bigger picture. This wasn't just a cleanup operation. This wasn't just about eliminating loose ends. Someone wasn't just destroying Blackthorn's history. They were rebuilding it. Eastwood clenched his jaw. His voice was firm when he spoke. We find Langley. Helton nodded. Agreed. Willis hesitated. And what if he doesn't want to be found? Eastwood smirked. Then we make him want to be. The truck rumbled back onto the highway, the sun fading behind the Wyoming mountains as they disappeared into the night. Judge Willis sat in the passenger seat, his mind racing. Victor Langley, a man who was supposed to be dead. A man who, if the notebook was right, was still out there, holding the kind of secrets that men like Pierce would kill to keep buried. And now, they had to find him before Pierce did. Willis exhaled, rubbing his temples. Tell me something, Clint. What exactly was Langley's role in Blackthorn? Eastwood's fingers flexed on the steering wheel. His voice was carefully measured. Langley didn't give orders. He gave options. Willis frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Helton answered instead. It means he didn't tell you what to do. He gave you 3 choices, and all of them ended in blood. The judge shivered at the implication. Eastwood kept his eyes on the road. Langley didn't get his hands dirty. He let other people do that for him. Willis shook his head. And now you think he's alive? Eastwood nodded. If Tanner said it, I believe it. Helton pulled out his phone, scrolling through something. If Langley's still breathing, he wouldn't be using his real name. Eastwood smirked. No kidding. Helton's fingers tapped against the screen. There's a lot of chatter on the dark web lately. Ex-Blackthorn operatives disappearing, accounts being frozen, offshore safe houses going dark. He looked up. Someone's cleaning house. Willis exhaled. And if we don't get to Langley first? Eastwood didn't hesitate. Then he's already dead. The hours stretched long, the road leading them further and further from anything that felt like civilization. Red Mesa, Arizona. That was the last known location. A forgotten town. A place that didn't exist on most maps. Willis glanced out the window. You ever been to this place before? Eastwood shook his head. No. Helton sighed. That makes 3 of us. The road signs became fewer. The headlights of passing cars became non-existent. By the time they crossed into Arizona, there was nothing but desert and silence. Willis exhaled, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. You think Langley knows we're coming? Eastwood smirked. I think he knew before we did. The Red Mesa Diner was exactly what Willis had expected. Old neon sign, cracked leather booths, the smell of burnt coffee hanging in the air. And in the back corner, a man sat alone. Older, weathered, a man who looked like he had seen too much of the world and had the scars to prove it. He wasn't surprised when they approached. He just sighed, taking a slow sip of coffee before setting the cup down. Took you long enough. Eastwood slid into the booth across from him. Nice to see you too, Langley. Willis hesitated, studying the man sitting in front of them. The ghost of Blackthorn. The man who might just have the answer to everything. Langley exhaled, shaking his head. You shouldn't have come. Helton leaned forward. We didn't have a choice. Langley's eyes flicked up sharp. calculating. Then he said something that made the air in the room turn ice cold. "Neither do I." Eastwood's jaw tightened. "What does that mean?" Langley glanced at the waitress. "Not here." He tossed a few bills on the table and stood. "Let's go. I don't have much time." Willis frowned. "Why not?" Langley turned toward him. "Because if I'm alive, that means I'm next." Life is full of stories that exist beneath the surface. Histories we'll never read. Choices we'll never fully understand. The most powerful forces aren't always the ones we recognize, but the ones moving quietly in the background, shaping the world without asking for permission. Judge Willis thought he understood the world, thought his courtroom was a place where law reigned over chaos, where rules determined fate. But there are things beyond rules. There are realities that don't fit neatly into legal codes or government records. And when you step into that world, you either adapt or you disappear. Clint Eastwood's journey in this story reminds us of something crucial. Experience carries weight. People often judge by what's visible, by age, by appearance, by reputation. But the truth of a person is found in what they've endured. Some battles are fought long before the rest of the world takes notice. And some warriors don't wear uniforms. Langley's warning holds another truth. The past is never as buried as we believe. Whether it's in personal choices or in the corridors of power, the decisions we make leave echoes. We don't get to outrun our history. At best, we learn to live with it. At worst, it comes looking for us. And for those who hold dangerous knowledge, who know things they shouldn't, who see the world for what it truly is, survival is about more than just staying ahead. It's about understanding that power doesn't always belong to the loudest, or the strongest, or even the most ruthless. Sometimes, it belongs to the ones who know when to disappear.